Our guest today, State Representative John Patterson. And the big news, I think, in Ohio in the last few weeks has been legislation passed, at least in the House, dealing with saving the nuclear power plants Perry and Davis-Besse, but also kind of ignoring green energy. So can you tell me what's going on? It's just not passed the House, is that correct?
It just passed last week, that is correct. So what's going on? It's a complex bill, to say the least. A lot of factors at work. And for us in the 99th District, in the shadow of the Perry plant, first thing that our listeners should understand is that of the 700 jobs there, almost 200 of them are held by residents of Ashtabula County. And these are well-paying jobs with benefits that do contribute to our local economy. Furthermore, statewide ramifications are such that First Energy, and with the Perry plant and the Davis-Besse plant, obviously, pay more than $30 million in taxes to the state revenue. And couple that with the local revenue. When I was this spring on the primary-secondary subcommittee on education, the representatives from both Benton Harbor, Salem School District, and Perry came forward to our committee to discuss the ramifications of what this closing would be like. And that's a factor, too. On the other hand, in its current iteration, the bill has been stripped of the energy efficiency standards, also the portfolio standards by which we are to wean ourselves off from such energy that is so heavily carbon related onto sustainable renewable. And currently, the solar and the wind energy only consist of 2% of our entire portfolio. So the concern was that if we don't have the nuclear option available with respect to electricity generation, that our portfolio would be so limited because gas hasn't caught up yet.
Right.
We have a lot of natural gas power plants coming online, but it's not to that point yet. So you have this mixed balance. It's about jobs. It's about the environment. It's about our district. It's about the state. And you factor all of those variables together, and you can see that opinions were across the board in all areas of the state. And there were many Republicans and Democrats who voted for this. There were a good number who voted against it. Obviously, it did pass the state legislature and headed over to the Senate. But it's really a mixed bag.
So it's kind of just comes down to saving the jobs in Perry right now and worrying about the green energy later? Or?
For me, that's what it came down to. We are in Ashtabula County in the midst of a recovery. And to lose those 200 jobs, let alone, and when they're refueling or when they're doing maintenance, it can run as high as 4,000 jobs between the two of those plants, in addition to the regular day-to-day positions. It was about jobs for us. And knowing that our portfolio wouldn't be as necessarily as balanced as it ought to be, we need to work on that. We need to come back to the renewable energy standards. There's a lot more work to be done. I know the Senate's going to pick up on this, but in the short run, I just couldn't walk away from the jobs that we have.
Can you tell me, in short as possible, what happened with First Energy? Why are they in this predicament?
Well, a couple of things, and this is just from an outside observer. One, with increasingly natural gas power plants, they have made an impact in that nuclear costs, quite frankly, more to generate. But it's still important to keep them in our portfolio. Secondly, quite frankly, they've made some business decisions that were questionable. I've had a number of constituents ask me, well, why'd they feel that they had to have naming rights to the Browns Stadium in Cleveland? Good question. I don't know. Not my decision to make. They already have a virtual monopoly. Why do you have to advertise that? So it's not up to me to make their business decisions. The bottom line for me is jobs that we need, and to make sure that all of our citizens, not just in Ohio but around the nation, have predictable supply of electricity. Well, let's face it, we are all dependent upon electricity. Bob, do you remember back in the summer of 2003 when we had that power outage for a few days?
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't buy groceries, you couldn't get gas, you couldn't do bank
Cell
transactions.
phones weren't even working.
You got it. And so the nuclear forms such an important component in our overall portfolio that to just pull the plug on them, and that's what was going to happen within the next year. In the short run, to take them offline could be catastrophic to our need for electricity and need for continuity with respect to the whole system. So I was praised by the folks who are going to be losing their jobs for my vote on that. I have been questioned by my environmentalists. I felt the more pressing needs was the jobs at this point, knowing that I am firmly committed to working towards a clean environment for all of us.
I saw a few Republicans saying, "Thank you, John Patterson, for voting for this."
I try to do what's best for our district, and this is something that is important for us. Now, morphing from that, speaking of the environment in Lake Erie, I know you wanted to talk to me about HB 7, the H2 Ohio program that deals specifically with clean water in Lake Erie and all around Ohio. I am a joint sponsor on that bill, and it's on the priority list, meaning that it's going to move, and the idea is to create a special fund, hundreds of millions of dollars, that are beyond the state budget. They'd be administered by a special board that would be created, much like OPERS, the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, a special board that would administer those funds, and an advisory council that would accept grants and applications from around the state for water quality related projects. It could be sewer systems. It could be the joint purchase of agricultural equipment that is very expensive but could be shared. But the idea is to provide a sustainable fund, and right now we've got a cap of $50 million a year that would be in existence for perpetuity. We know that water quality challenges with our lakes, with our rivers, and imagine a couple years ago, this was in 2015, a nearly 700-mile algal bloom on the Ohio River. I mean, that's hard to, but we have that kind of challenge. We have nitrogen problems flowing south into Ohio, which combined with nitrogen in other states form the red tide that we see in the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, we see the algal blooms here in the Lake Erie.
More toward Toledo.
Exactly, but there's more to this story than that, and I want to share that in a moment. But the idea is to clean Ohio's water as best we can. Now, more toward Toledo, you see the green junk floating on the water, but last year we held a perch summit in December, Ashtabula, because there's been, my perch fishermen are telling me they're definitely not there. And they're not catching as much. Now, keep in mind the walleye are well fed, and they're feeding on perch. The hatches have been average. There is a bird that's taken up nesting here, cormorants, that have a voracious appetite for perch. And then ODNR showed us in August this satellite photo of Lake Erie and an oxygen depleted zone due to the decaying algae. That zone was squarely off the coast of Ashtabula and Conneaut. No oxygen, no perch, unhappy fishermen that contact their state reps. So we, even though we don't see it on the surface, do and are impacted by that bloom in the Western Basin. And quite frankly, Bob, we're looking at, they're predicting some terrible blooms this summer because of all the rain. You get heavy rain in May, April, and March, April, May, which we've had. It really creates a problem.
So what do you do about it?
It's a long-term problem. We're dealing with legacy phosphorus here. And in another show, we could do a deep dive on legacy phosphorus and how it's been there for years, and for some reason, and we don't know why, it's releasing from the soil and being washed away, even though we're not applying more. I mean, Scott's Fertilizer has taken all the phosphorus out of its fertilizer for the last few years now. Farmers are not applying as much as they were in terms of the phosphorus, and it doesn't make sense.
But we have the problem.
But we still have the problem. Yeah. It's about legacy phosphorus. It's phosphorus. It's been in the soil for years, for decades. And I've seen some of the research going back to the 1930s, this buildup of phosphorus. Point is, it's being released for what reason we don't know, which is why we need to do more research. and at the same time do a better job with respect to water quality around the state, hence HB 7.
Let's talk. We've got John Patterson's our guest state representative, maybe 4 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about the ride safety. I was in Chicago when the little boy was killed on the
Fireball at the Ohio State Fair.
It's very important people know I was in Chicago. No, anyway, so that was a real I guess my point was that was a big story across the country.
It was, and we started working on legislation at the time that would give the Ohio Department of Agriculture, who oversees ride safety, much more power to enforce those safety regulations that are critically important. What has happened since then is that I've been working closely with the director of the Department of Agriculture to come up with legislation that would give them more tools. For example, a lot of those rides are very expensive. In order to pay for them, you want them to run year-round. That makes sense, correct? Mm-hmm. So some of them actually spend the winter in the Caribbean, which sounds like a cool place to go. I could see you running a ride and with your straw hat on, and Bob's just cool, and everybody's happy. The problem is they come back, but they have been exposed to salt air, which in some of these rides is critically detrimental to the components with respect to corrosion. So we didn't have any way of tracking them. So part of what this law does is if a ride's been out of state for any reason for greater than 30 days, we need to know for how long and where it was. Secondly, there's some provisions for photographic evidence and for a paper trail when rides have been repaired, major repairs that would impact safety. That wasn't there before. We're getting more boots on the ground in terms of inspectors of the rides, because keep in mind, it's not just the thrill rides, it's the bounce houses, it's the zip lines. ODA inspects all of those rides. So the bottom line is that this bill that has the support of the Ohio Department of Agriculture, has support of the ride industry too, is looking to tomorrow, Tuesday, June 4th it would be, is going to be passed out of committee. We hope to get it to the floor so that our rides can be better inspected this spring and this summer, so as to forestall a tragic event as we saw at the Ohio State Fair on that Fireball ride.
I would imagine the ride industry wants a good reputation. They don't want people to wonder if this ride's safe or that ride's safe for their kids.
And it has impacted. If you look at attendance of fairs and the Ohio State Fair, some part of the draw of going to a fair is the rides. And even as a kid, that was one of the things. If you weren't in a 4-H, you're going there to see the rides and to experience them. Well, here's the other thing, too. As we have demanded more and more thrill rides, in terms of the engineering technology, they have delivered, but there's more stress points in some of these thrill rides, which have to be inspected properly. So the manufacturers sometimes, here's another component of the bill, release updates. It's important for the Ohio Department of Agriculture to have access to those updates too, like an owner's manual for a car when they send you an update. So that too will help ensure that these rides are as safe as they can be, so our citizens can enjoy them and not worry as much about safety.
So it would be different. There'll be a temporary ride that may come to Ashtabula County Fair for Fair Week and then go someplace else versus a ride that's there all the time, like at Cedar Point, that sort of thing. And
well, the ODA inspects those rides that travel too. They're inspected as well. The Cedar Point folks, they've been involved in this legislation too. They obviously having a ride set, they know what they're looking for every day. They're out there checking. So it's a couple of two different challenges that they have, but it's all ride safety, and the ODA is ultimately responsible for that.
All right, we are out of time. We didn't even get to school funding. We'll have to
next month.
That's right. I'm sure it'll still be a topic.
It will be.
All right, John Patterson, State Representative, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.